Chapter 2. The A-113 Briefing. 2 days after the telegram, Dr. Nathaniel Harrow sat beneath the polished brass lamps of the University of Ashford, the long table of the Department of History spread before him. The lamps burned evenly, current flowing from the Ashford electrical plant. Their light was clear, steady, and silent, not the hissing sputter of dynamos in the field, but the constant glow of an established, centralized power grid. He remembered when it had been otherwise. Before the Continental War, electricity had been little more than an exhibition marvel. Dynamos demonstrated at the World's Fair, or oversized prototypes shown only in the university's Department of Applied Physics. Now, entire cities throughout the Western world and Hua glowed with it, and across the Commonwealth, a deliberate effort was underway to bind towns and countryside alike into regional power grids, beginning with the eastern seaboard. England, it was said, had begun similar efforts, though whether their poorly developed countryside could support it remained uncertain. The table itself dominated the chamber, long, heavy oak, scarred by years of elbows and ink, now spread with folders, photographs, and trays of relics. To Harrow, it looked like the academic equivalent of a campaign table, and the men around it were his fellow officers. Scholars, not soldiers, yet every bit as serious in their craft. His revolver was absent. The university prohibited firearms on campus. At his side, he instead wore the officer's saber he had wielded in the Continental War. Blades were different, permitted as marks of service, tolerated even in these halls. He disliked leaving the revolver behind, but the saber reminded him what he was, not only a scholar, but a soldier who had commanded men before he measured ruins. The chamber was full. Professors crowded the table, civil officials sat at the margins, while history graduate students lined the paneling with pencils poised over notebooks. At the head sat Professor Aldwin, chairman of the department. Tall, exact, his beard white at the edges. He rapped his knuckles once, and the room quieted. "Gentlemen, we are convened to consider Site A-113. Until classification, that name will stand." His voice was calm but firm. "I remind you also, the earlier find is Site C-17, nothing else. The newspaper's Drowned Temple is a vulgarity. Unofficial names invite fables before the evidence is known. They burden our work. A-113 is not yet public knowledge, and I intend it to remain so." Dr. Harrow's jaw tightened slightly. He had heard Drowned Temple muttered on the train and had read it on pamphlets posted outside the university gates. Already, weeks of careful work had been warped into myth. "Mr. Fowler," Aldwin said to the clerk, "proceed." Photographs were carried along the table. The first showed a gully cut through forest soil, its base lined with squared foundations of stone and concrete. "Bonded aggregate," rumbled Professor Merton. "Uniform, deliberate. No villager's craft." "Intervals," said Professor Severin, tapping his notes. "Equidistant. Street alignments, most likely, if this truly is a city." "They were builders," Aldwin agreed, "not squatters. Streets mark permanence." The next set of photographs showed a subterranean structure sealed by collapse, accessible only because a small sinkhole had opened up in one corner of the structure. The photographs drew the room into silence. Skeletons lay in the silt. Children, their smaller bones immediately apparent. Cats and dogs at their sides, instantly recognizable even to the untrained. "Companions," Harrow said at last. "These were lives lived, not sacrifices." Professor Harland, the department's anthropologist, leaned forward, adjusting his spectacles. "Note the pelvis here. Broader, flared, female, and this narrower, heavier jaw, male. The differences are unmistakable once you know where to look. 2 adults, 1 man, and 1 woman. Their children are beside them." He tapped another plate. The dog curled at their feet. They did not flee. The stair collapsed above them. "See here. The beam across the steps. Debris heaped behind. They were trapped." A murmur spread. The graduate students scribbled furiously, recording not only the images but Harland's precise words. "Families," Severin repeated quietly. Entire families. They died as they lived, Harrow said. His face remained steady, but the words were heavy. The next tray carried relics themselves, not photographs. A warped shard of some translucent substance, brittle and smooth, and a blade of metal that gleamed unnaturally bright. The professors leaned forward as the blade was laid in the center of the table. Merton lifted it carefully, holding it to the light. Unnatural, Ansel muttered. Metal should not survive. No rust, no scaling. It gleams as though it were forged yesterday. Oxidation requires only air and time, Merton said, lowering it back to its cloth. This endures against both. Aldwin gestured to the students. Enter it. A worked metal, enduring, unclassified. Harland frowned. A knife, a tool, it doesn't matter which. It's not chance. The Salite had methods we do not. The shard was next, passed carefully from hand to hand. Neither clay nor glass, Severin said, turning it over. Too light. Too uniform. The fracture lines are all wrong. Resin? Ansel ventured. Pressed? Treated, perhaps? No resin curls at its edges when warped, Severin replied. This softened, then bent. Look here. The lip has folded upon itself. It was found in a cellar among domestic things, Harrow interjected. His expression stayed flat, but his tone was firm. Not a token. Not an ornament. Something used in life. Aldwin's voice was measured. Then let it be entered as such. A material without name. Artificial origin unclassified. The next tray contained fused remnants. Vitrified stone, blackened lumps of ceramic, clay warped and folded like tar. Merton lifted one and turned it over, the edge glinting faintly where it had liquefied. Fire cannot do this, he said flatly. This is stone melted. Heat beyond fire. Professor Ansel adjusted his spectacles, peering at the glassy sheen. Volcanic, then. An eruption would account for the vitrification. A pyroclastic surge could scour a city flat in moments. Volcanic? Severin countered, voice sharp. Then where is the cone? Where are the lava flows? The geology of the region is well studied. No volcanic strata, no vents, no ash beds beyond the deposits we already know. Unless it was an ancient cone, Ansel pressed, eroded beyond recognition. Merton snorted. You do not erase a volcano so neatly. Even the oldest mountains bear scars. There is nothing. Then an asteroid, Ansel suggested, irritation creeping into his voice. A bolide strike would explain the glassing, stone struck by heaven's fire. Severin leaned forward, pencil tapping the table. Where is the crater? Such an impact leaves more than heat. Shock lines, pressure faults, ejecta layers. We've found none. At the far end, a younger scholar Harrow didn't recognize, cleared his throat. If I may, an airburst. A detonation above the ground. Such an event could level a city and scorch its stones without leaving a crater. Wide destruction, but no scar on the earth. The professors fell into mutters, weighing this. Merton shook his head slowly. Possible, but the heat patterns are too irregular for a single blast. Regional, scattered, as if several waves of fire moved through. The young scholar spoke again. At certain times of year, we see meteor showers blazing through the heavens. If such an event brought not dust, but stones, larger, heavier, striking the air in number, the detonations could have leveled an entire city. Several bursts, scattered, would explain why the heat patterns are irregular rather than singular. It matches the early colonial journals, Harrow said, his voice steady. The first settlers wrote of fields of ash, but never found a source. The city of Ashford was named for those deposits. They remain unexplained. Now we see them again, stone fused, clay folded. The cause remains uncertain. Professor Aldwin raised his hand, silencing the room before the speculation unraveled further. Record the evidence. Vitrified stone, fused ceramics, warped clay. Cause uncertain. Enter also that the pattern is regional, not local. Pens scratched furiously. Finally, Professor Varr brought out his folio. The photograph showed symbols carved into a foundation block, uprights, crossbars, bowls, softened but still in ordered lines. The professors leaned in, debating at once. Decorative? Ansel asked. Too regular, Severin replied. A builder's code? Suggested Merton. Harrow raised his hand, silencing them. This is writing. The room quieted. Every gaze turned to him. I have seen its like only once, on the architrave of C-17. The same forms recur here. Ordered, deliberate, repeating. Not ornament. A script, he paused, his jaw tightening. That makes this only the second instance of K-Light, writing discovered. It is strange. In Europa, similar script have been found, but only in sacred sites, shrines, burial places, temples. That is consistent with C-17, which we have judged ceremonial. But here, he gestured toward the earlier plates of foundations and civic works. A-113 is a city. Domestic, civic, functional. A script like this in such a place is unprecedented. The silence deepened. The graduate student's pencils scratched faster. Professor Aldwin inclined his head. Then let it be entered. C-17 and A-113, both bearing script of the same hand. The first ceremonial, the second civic. Both are attributable to the Salite tradition. He turned to Dr. Harrow. You will take charge of the preliminary survey at A-113. Record everything. Disturb nothing. Your reports will come directly here. One of the civil officials added, in the spirit of international scientific cooperation, observers from abroad have quietly been invited. They have no rights, but they will listen to every word you speak. Keep your conclusions cautious. Dr. Harrow's expression tightened, but his voice was steady. They will have records. Nothing more. When he left the chamber, the quads outside were crowded with students. Pamphlets changed hands, lurid sketches of the drowned temple spread across cheap newsprint. The phrase stung each time he heard it. Sensational, reductive, corrosive to careful work. The site called A-113 had no name yet, only stone and ash, families buried where they had lived, and a strange script cut into walls no one alive could read. That was enough for him. It was time to get to work.